whole system this is a climate engineering Manhattan project. It is inconceivably massive, and the consequences will be beyond what most can even imagine if this continues.
Okay, once again, for dummies, Dane, for dummies. Tell me exactly how they do it. So, like the grand scale of it. So, I just want to understand with geoengineering what the grand scale is, because I understand what Rainmaker did: make rain, stop rain, make rain in a little area. Okay, but geoengineering does what? Like, what exactly is it doing?
Again, they can augment precipitation, they can diminish it, they can disperse it, they can completely cut off regions from any precipitation, just like they did with Pacific Palisades, for example. No rain for 8 months before those incinerations hit. And again, we can speculate, Kim, on the agendas and objectives involved. And I would argue they're much, much darker than the vast majority even dare to imagine at this point. And as far as how dark those agendas are, let's just consider for a moment a quote from Zbigniew Brzezinski, former U.S. presidential advisor from President Johnson. We know how bad he was, all the way to 2017 when Brzezinski died. This is a very well-known quote, but he said that with today's technology, it's far easier to kill a million people than to control them. So again, this is their crown jewel weapon of power control. It is that dark. We have the global elite stating they want to cull populations down to 500 million. That's a big drop. And we have lots of different layers in this, medical scenarios that we just all went through in the start of the 2020s. But there is so much nefarious activity and various layers to this that most don't want to face it. But with climate intervention operations, Kim, it's not just weather warfare, covert weather warfare that they can blame on nature, as they're so good at doing. And you hear them, the local meteorologists and news anchors, constantly saying Mother Nature this, Mother Nature that. There's no Mother Nature anything about any weather event at this point. Nothing. In fact, they will try as hard as they can to hide these operations, because the moment the public knows what's been done to them without their knowledge or consent, every single weather cataclysm becomes a potential liability to those in power that have intervened in these operations for so long. And that is simply a tidal wave that would overturn the current paradigm. So they will try to hide this until the last possible moment. But because they've disrupted the entire system, it is impossible now to say that any particular weather event would have happened in that way, at that time, and that location, if not for these operations.
Okay, how do they do it?
You have, again, the dispersion of particulates in the atmosphere. How much particulate matter? So, again, to separate the localized cloud seeding from climate engineering, a few pounds per payload with localized weather mod, up to 100 tons per payload with climate engineering. So we work with the University of Minnesota, an internationally recognized agricultural institution, and about 500 lab tests over that state. And it was extrapolated the amount of climate engineering elements in the rain, which those tests prove, and then projecting that globally. It appears something in the range of 40 to 60 million tons. That's an inconceivable amount of materials being dispersed into skies annually. That is completely derailing all of the planet's life support systems, destroying the ozone layer, contaminating virtually everything: aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, polymer fibers, graphene, surfactants. For those that have seen rain that looks like it's foaming, a runoff that looks like it's foaming, that's because there's surfactants in our rain. So again, the degree of damage already done can't be quantified. And the more damage they do, like it's like the pharmaceutical industrial approach for the human body that we see all these commercials on TV, Kim. Take this for that, and here's 20 side effects, and here's the next group of pharmaceuticals you need to cover that. And it's the same mentality. They're not going to stop. But the bottom line is 40 to 60 million tons a year of toxic nanoparticles, toxic elements. We're breathing all of it in. Every single one of us, every person we test is packed with these elements.
And so they're using big planes to spray the skies with these chemicals?
KC-10s, KC-135, C-17s. We have up-close film footage of these aircraft at altitude, nozzles visible, turning on and off. And we have a certain element, even within alt media, that pretends to be in the fight to stop climate engineering, which they then pretend isn't even happening, because they pretend we're just looking at jet exhaust, which is an absolute deception. What their motives are, I don't know. But when we have up-close film footage of these aircraft at altitude, nozzles visible, we have up-close photographs of the retrofit nozzles on the wing pylons aimed at the exhaust jet stream. There's nothing to debate here. This is happening, period.
Yeah. And I mean, clearly you got to get the pilots to do it. You got to get all these people in on it. So how do you get them in on it without telling them they're doing something that's good for people?
You don't necessarily have to get that many in on, especially the flight scenario. So we're working with commercial pilots that know this is occurring. They know some commercial aircraft are being utilized, but we are not in any way, shape, or form implicating, in this case, for example, commercial personnel. Not at all. These are automated systems. In the case of military pilots, we know they tend to do whatever they're told to do.
Mhm.
The spraying of Agent Orange in Vietnam is a good example, isn't it? I mean, were those pilots told, hey, this is going to kill your pal on the ground a decade or two out? He's going to have cancer, not to mention the countless civilians. So military personnel tend to do what they're told, follow orders. And Kim, do you remember, you've seen historical footage perhaps of the nuclear bomb detonations in Nevada where the soldiers, they jump out of the trench and they run toward the blast site, not
Mhm.
away from it, toward it. Every single one of those soldiers died an early and very painful death because of that exposure. In fact, the Nevada detonations, we now have peer-reviewed science study in the US, very few know this, that attribute no less than 500,000 Americans dying from the downwind fallout of those detonations. How many Americans know that? So again, we're not dealing with sanity, we're not dealing with benevolence. And Kim, you've probably had people ask you this, why would, quote, they do this to themselves? You've probably heard that, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
You want me to
Yeah.
fill in that blank?
Yeah, for sure.
You do so. So because that's a common premise in which many people dismiss this. Now it can't be happening. They wouldn't do this to themselves. Who's they first? They are those who print the money. The occupants of the White House, I don't care what their political stripe are, they're puppets at the end of strings, period. And when they step out of line, when they draw a line in the sand, and the last one to do that was JFK, and he lived about a week after he did that. They took him out immediately. So the rest is theater. I don't care what political stripe. Again, it's all theater. So those who print the money run it all. They run the matrix media narrative. They run militaries, thus they run countries. They control it all. So what have they done to themselves already? We have the detonation of 2,400 plus nuclear bombs. Don't they know they work after a few dozen? But they kept doing it. And that's contaminated the entire planet, period. That's a fact of record. We have Project Starfish Prime and Project Fishbowl. Those are two stunning examples of the insanity we're dealing with. That's the detonation of hydrogen bombs in the magnetosphere that they thought could collapse the entire atmosphere. Did that stop them? No, it didn't stop them. And in fact, we're still dealing with the repercussions of that in the magnetosphere today. And we have the continued building of nuclear bombs. We have nuclear power plants. We have Fukushima. It's a triple nuclear meltdown. No technology to fix it. No end in sight. People think it's all better now. That couldn't be further from the truth. We have 442 nuclear power plants online right now. They're building 60 more, all of which will go into meltdown as societal collapse occurs. There's nobody to man those sites. It takes about 3 decades to cold shut down a nuclear power plant. So again, what I would argue is we're dealing with a headless, heartless, soulless cancer that's addicted to power and control. Does an addict care that the next fix may kill them? No, they don't. And and also, I'll end with this. We have psychoanalysis of those in power. This is right from the manual, from extensive study. And the study cites, quote, a near total lack of comprehension as to the consequences of their actions, even to themselves. Power addict.
Yeah. Okay, so how do you convince people? Like, give us some of the evidence. A lot of people are watching right now and they don't believe any of this. Maybe they believe that there's, some modification and attempts at modification, but they don't believe. Like, how deep does this go? Do you think that they're creating hurricanes, for example? Like, what weather are we experiencing that they're creating? Are they creating earthquakes? Are they creating hurricanes, tornadoes, or is it flooding? Is it just rain? Like, what is it exactly?
Those are all great questions. And in every case, what I would argue is they are able to manipulate the template under which those conditions occur. So, in the case of hurricanes, cyclonic rotations, and many people claim we could never manipulate something that large.
Right.
Let's look back at Project Cirrus in 1947 when they dumped about 100 kilos of material into a storm that appeared to change its trajectory about 180 degrees. In fact, so clearly changed it that there was legal action occurring when it hit Georgia. the blowback from what they did that they publicized then and they stopped talking about it afterwards. So that very small input seemed to have a very large effect. And the atmosphere is much more malleable than people understand. So in the case of hurricanes now, the oceans are superheating. And when I say superheating, I mean superheating. That we've had temperatures in Florida in the last year plus of 102 degrees. That's an ocean temperature of 102 degrees. That's the same temperature Jacuzzi recommends for their hot tubs.
Yeah.
Everything's dead. The coral reefs and kelp all over the globe. So the oceans are so scaldingly hot that they can definitely spawn cyclonic rotations. They can augment the atmospheric conditions to help that process occur. But again, we're not implicating the spawning of these storms. What we are saying definitively that we can prove is these storms are positively being manipulated. So in the case of Hurricane Helene, Kim, you remember that trajectory and how it wiped out North Carolina, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We recorded, your listeners can search geoengineeringwatch.org, Hurricane Helene. They can search hurricanes, period. They can see the recording of Harvey, Helene, Ian, Maria. We recorded the land-based frequency transmissions that steered that storm to where it went and held it in place. And again, perhaps those in power feel they need to leave a trail of breadcrumbs for any who cared to look, which makes them feel justified about what they do because no one cared to do anything about it. But we still have access to those data loops. I hope that continues because it's irrefutable proof of the effect of the frequency transmissions. And these are patented processes on those storms. So it's not a matter of belief. It's a matter of preconception and programming at this point. People need to believe what they see with their own eyes. And Kim, you've seen, I'm sure, these trails. You'll see one across the entire horizon that then stops and the plane continues on, leaving nothing behind it. You've probably seen that before, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you observe, you'll definitely. And then the excuse from those who are invested in denying this issue is, well, that's just different atmospheric layers. No, that's a blatant, glaring lie. The atmosphere layers horizontally, not vertically. That plane is progressing at a specific altitude. It doesn't go through a wall of a different atmospheric layer. That's not how the atmosphere works.
Right.
In addition, when we see the grid patterns one day and nothing the next, we see aircraft tankers with their transponders turned off. No one can do that but the DoD. You can't track those planes. We see planes over non-existent commercial routes. There's no routes there at all, but yet we see these aircraft making loops, X's. This is so incredibly blatant that, again, the denial is ludicrous. And I'll leave it with this. We have the entire global climate science community, because I want to give a why. People ask why, in addition to the power and control, what's their stated purpose?
Right.
And their stated purpose is solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol injection, cloud albedo enhancement. It's important to use the science terms. I want to stress that. If you're conveying this issue to anybody, any media person, any elected official, stick to the science terms. Semantics matter. We're playing a game of chess. We need to play well. The stated purpose is to put light scattering particles in the sky to slow down the warming of the planet, when in fact, those temporary toxic cooldowns come at the cost of an even worse warming. And those light scattering particles are, for all those in the environmental communities that are pushing the alternative forms of energy, hydro, wind, solar, all three of which I have on my residence, which was the cover article of the world's largest renewable energy magazines, part of my background with Bechtel Power. That's what brought me into this, Kim. Losing massive amounts of solar uptake from whatever these aircraft were emitting, which I knew could not be, quote, condensation. How much sense does it make sense to push renewable energy or alternative energy while we're blocking the sun? How ludicrous is that?
Mm. Okay, so that makes some sense to me that people would be told, well, we're doing this to stop global warming.
Yep.
Climate change, climate change. I mean, a lot of people are being told climate change is the biggest existential threat that we face, that we're all going to burn up, humankind is going to go extinct. And so I could see where people think in the name of climate change, they're doing a good thing, that they're helping in some way by spraying these chemicals all around and manipulating the weather or manipulating the climate. Um, that would be, I think, the benevolent side, right? That's where the person thinks, oh, I'm doing this and I'm doing a good thing. We're helpful because we've all been told climate change is such a
For
huge
those carrying
disaster.
it out, yes, you're correct.
Yeah. Okay. Um, how long have they been doing this?
These operations were deployed at scale immediately after World War II over the polar regions. So, and many, this is another important point, many refer to the World War II bombers that left these massive plumes behind them as condensation, as some sort of proof that this is just condensation we see now. So let's refute that. On the military archives, we found it's in our groundbreaking documentary, The Dimming, which is 26 million views and counting in spite of social media censorship. That's the A to Z in this issue. But we found, and it's in that film, military footage of one bomber, a B 17, flying in formation below other B 17s that were leaving a massive plume behind them. And then one directly above it shuts off instantly, as if that plume was cut with a knife. It was clearly a dispersion that was turned off. Did that plane drop out of the sky? Did it fall out of formation? Did it turn its engines off? No. No, that was a dispersion period, and that's proof of that dispersion. They would have had to have been doing beta testing in World War II in order to deploy immediately after World War II. So let's compare, again, even those engines with a modern jet engine, a high bypass turbofan jet engine, which is all military tankers, all commercial aircraft. That's a jet-powered fan.
Mhm.
90% of the air that moves through that jet is not combusted. So by design, that jet aircraft, or that jet engine, is nearly incapable of producing any condensation trail except under rare and extreme circumstances. So again, we have the entire global climate science community right now, every country around the globe, describing exactly what we see in our skies as something they want to do immediately, to deploy jets to spray particles. But then they say, oh no, you're not seeing what you're seeing. That's not really what that is. It would look just like that and have the same effects, filling our skies with sun blocking filth, disrupting the rain cycle, destroying the ozone layer. But that's not what that is. It's ludicrous at this point. Absolutely ludicrous.
Okay, when you see a natural disaster event like the flooding in Texas or a
Mhm.
hurricane, um, how do you know? I mean, certainly before they started doing this geoengineering, these types of events happened. I mean, since the dawn of time, we would imagine that there's been extreme weather events that have happened. How can you tell if one is because of geoengineering or just one is Mother Nature?
Well, again, at this point, and this is why they're trying to hide this so desperately, because the liability issues are beyond calculation, because they've disrupted the entire system. So you can't say any event would have happened in that way at that time in that way without it. But in the case of Texas, again, we have recorded. It's on our website. We recorded the frequency transmissions that manipulated that moisture plume. Same with Hurricane Ian, Harvey. And we have other events too, Kim. Do you remember when Dubai got, this is about 2 years ago, they got 2 years worth of rain in six
Yeah.
hours?
Yeah.
So let's look at that event. Dubai, days earlier, announced they were going to ditch the dollar. And then they were hit with this massive storm. They initially admitted that they had their weather modification operations being conducted in the days before. But again, we're still comparing the ant to the elephant. Then they backtracked off that because it started to raise a lot of attention, which they didn't want. We recorded in the Persian Gulf off the coast of Dubai the day before and the day of massive frequency transmission signatures on aerosolized cloud cover. That means there are geoengineering operations going on there at that time. So again, there's an indisputable correlation between these events, the timing, what was the shot across the bow of the country that was stepping out of line. And you asked a question earlier, which I didn't answer. I apologize. You asked about tectonic weaponry. And that's really beyond what most people can accept as being a reality. Let's look at Turkey. When Turkey announced they were going to uh, ditch NATO and they were going against the tide, then they get clusters of earthquakes, wiped out so much of their country. You remember that, right?
Yeah.
So, with weapons of mass destruction like HARP in Alaska, many of your listeners may know what HARP is. It's a benign acronym that means nothing, and it's meant to mean nothing because people don't, or those in power don't want people to understand that's a weapon of mass destruction. It's called an ionosphere heater. And what that facility does, it's no secret that it exists. Everything I'm stating is not a secret. It's historical record. It's the record of the data that's involved with that facility. So that facility can transmit 3.6 million watts of power into the electrically charged ionosphere. And this fits under the category of Project Starfish Prime and Project Fish Roll I mentioned earlier, total psychotic manipulation of our life-supporting atmosphere. It causes an electrical chain reaction in the ionosphere that causes the atmosphere to expand up and down, and the downward push creates a high-pressure heat dome. And we hear that term all the time now, all the time. And that compressing air heats the area below it, and it circulates upper level wind currents clockwise around it like a pulley. And that's part of how they manipulate atmospheric pressure zones and thus wind flows, thus precipitation, where it falls, where it doesn't. And that is why the West Coast is continually baked and burned, and the East Coast is getting far more rain than they should. And there's a reason. We know some of the reasons behind all of that.
Hey guys, thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson Show, which you could check out Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. See you there.